Well, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And let me reiterate, the microphones are here in the front, and I'm sure there are many, both in Scotland and the United Kingdom and elsewhere, who would treasure the opportunity to ask you a question. Let me first say that we have a little bit of a problem in Iceland using this title, First Minister, because in our language we only have a single title in Icelandic, which corresponds to a Prime Minister.
That will do.
Last year I addressed you as Prime Minister here at this gathering, which I think caused some diplomatic problems for me in some quarters I'm not going to mention. But before I take the first question from the floor, let me put this question to you. In your presentation and in the way your government has formed policies in the areas which are of great importance to us here, climate change, clean energy, new forms of economic activity, shipping, tourism, and elsewhere, it is as if Scotland, irrespective of your constitutional position, is an independent actor with respect to the rest of us, whether we are in Iceland or Norway or across the Arctic or even in other parts of the world. So it would be interesting to hear your ideas of, irrespective of how these legal framework, whether it's the legal framework of the United Kingdom or your relationship with the European Union evolves, do you see an increasing role for Scotland as such in cooperation with countries and regions and partners, both in the Arctic and elsewhere in the world, where almost the constitutional position becomes an irrelevance because so much of what you can do is already in your hands?
It's an interesting question. I take the view that we should seek to make as big a contribution as we possibly can to the world, regardless of the constitutional limitations that are placed upon us. And I think Scotland does that very well across the areas that I've been talking about today, and in many other aspects of democratic, political, social, economic life as well. We have a fairly substantial programme of international aid, for example, where we work with countries, Malawi being the principal one, and work to help develop countries in Africa. So we don't allow the constitutional arrangements of our country to limit us where we can possibly avoid that. And I am very keen to look for areas where we can deepen and strengthen the contribution we make. I think it would be naive of me, though, to sit here and say that the constitutional arrangements don't limit us at all, or that they are irrelevant. And you know, that's particularly the case right now, because Scotland, despite voting overwhelmingly to remain a member of the European Union, is about to find itself taken out of the European Union. And that will have implications for our economy, our society in Scotland, no matter how hard we work to try to mitigate those implications. So that's a very tangible, hard example right now of the implications and the downsides of not being a fully independent country. So we will not let the constitutional arrangements get in our way where we can avoid that, but equally, I think we are experiencing right now the limitations on us and the negative consequences of not having freedom of manoeuvre in the foreign relations field.
Well, thank you. Let's take the first question and state your name and go directly to the question, please.
Hello, my name is Rockford Weitz. I'm Director of Maritime Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. My question is about how we as the world and Arctic enthusiasts, how do we help the Arctic become the emerging market that actually does energy policy smartly? And the vision that we've talked about in our program is Scotland and Iceland as leaders with undersea cables connecting their local, or net, well, I'll just say local, renewable energy infrastructure to the regional needs. And so it could be essentially an Arctic Circle of undersea electricity cables that then allowed Iceland and Scotland to export those renewable energies to those who need them in Russia, Norway, Alaska, Canada, for example. I wanted to get your thoughts on if you think that's
we've got the question, I
Yes.
think. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in general terms, I'm enthusiastic about that kind of development. There's been some feasibility work done already on the possibility of connections of that nature between Scotland and Iceland, and I think we may see more development around that in the future. To go to the heart of your question, how do we encourage, support countries in the Arctic to be leaders in terms of renewable technologies? I think much of that is underway already. I think you see it here in Iceland, you certainly see it in Scotland, and the more we can have partnerships and collaborations that mutually support that work, the better. Often, and this is something we should take as an advantage and a positive. Often those parts of the world that face the biggest challenges from climate change in this instance are the ones where you see by necessity the innovation and the inventiveness and the sheer willpower to try to come up with the solutions. And final point on this is I couldn't stress enough this importance, not just for countries represented here, but for the world at large, as seeing tackling of climate change not just as an obligation and a responsibility, but a massive opportunity. And the countries that get ahead of that are the countries that are going to cash in on that technology for a long time to come.
Thank you. Let's take 2 questions and make them very quick.
Yes, my name is Rasmus Bertelsen from the University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway. First Minister, last year you made a very elegant remark about how Scotland had invented the modern world. And that was, of course, the contribution of the Scottish Enlightenment. Adam Smith, James Watt. In a way, you could say that Scotland is to blame for this mess. What you just outlined in terms of social justice and green energy, I came to think about it's like a second Scottish Enlightenment. And just like the ideas of the first Scottish Enlightenment were so incredibly successful and changed the world, how can those ideas that you just outlined in what I'd call a second Scottish Enlightenment about social justice and green energy, how can those ideas be as successful as the ideas of the first Scottish Enlightenment? Thank you.
Okay, let's take that first, and then the next question afterwards.
Okay, claiming that Scotland invented the modern world sounds less of an elegant statement and more of a boast, but I'm happy to repeat it today. Can I just clarify, though, we invented the good things and we'll leave others to take responsibility for the mess. I probably mentioned last year a fantastic book that I would recommend. It's called How Scots Invented the Modern World. It's written by a Canadian called Arthur Herman. It's well worth a read because it sets out exactly what you have talked about, the ideas and the philosophy and the inventions that came from the Enlightenment literally did invent much of what the world enjoys today. As First Minister of Scotland now, though, one of the things that's uppermost in my mind is the fact that you cannot rest on the laurels of a past reputation forever. So 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now, I want people to be writing books that say Scotland powered the world that will be lived in at that time. And that is why I think calling it a second Scottish Enlightenment is a good thing to do. But the work that's going on right now in Scotland to make sure that we're taking advantage of our mass and very powerful natural resources to couple that with the excellence of our universities. We've got more universities in Scotland per head of population than any other country in the world, I think, with the exception of Luxembourg, to be strictly accurate about it. And that inventiveness that powered the previous Enlightenment is the big challenge we have today. I think we are well underway with that. How we make sure that doesn't just benefit Scotland, but the world overall is part of the reason we're here at forums like this one, because it's those collaborations and partnerships that will help to make sure that we can do that, helping make sure that the best brains in the world are used to assist us doing that, and then make sure that what we're doing in Scotland can benefit people elsewhere too.
Okay, next question.
Ziad Reslan from Harvard University. First Minister, you mentioned a couple times how the Scottish people overwhelmingly voted to stay in the EU. As we're seeing resurging independence movements in Europe, not least of which in Catalonia, how will Scotland make sure that its voice is heard over the next 2 years of Brexit negotiations?
I'm not going to say anything here that will surprise anybody. I think in time, and perhaps not too much time, Scotland will become a fully independent country rather than one that tries to act independent where we can. That, of course, will be a democratic decision by people in Scotland when it happens. The challenge for us now, as you rightly say, is to try to make our voice heard in the negotiations that will shape the UK's future relationship with the European Union, without depressing everybody with the horrible detail of these negotiations at the moment. It's not the easiest of tasks. One of the challenges in the UK right now is that there is no, within the United Kingdom government, there is no clarity of thought about what that future relationship should look like. There is deep divisions, which then make it even more difficult to influence that. But we are very focused on trying to do that. As I briefly said in my opening remarks, I regret that the UK is leaving the EU. I accept that it will. I don't see why, though, that means leaving the single market. I don't see why that means leaving the customs union, things that really matter not just for our economy, but provide the foundation for some of the collaborations that we talk about today. So we will continue to argue for that, what I would describe pragmatic and common sense outcome to this, and we have to wait and see what the next couple of years brings once that position becomes clearer. But it's one of the biggest worries I think I have at the moment about the future for Scotland and the UK, and my responsibility to try to get the best out of that is an important one.
Let's take one more question from the floor.
First Minister, thank you for coming. Today is also the birthday of my favorite British politician, Margaret Thatcher, who would have turned 92 today. And I'll tell you why I brought her up later on. My question and comment was actually going to be on the constitutional limits point that you mentioned. I'm a Turkish citizen myself, and I fully respect the fact that the future of Scotland and the future of the UK rests only with its citizens and the people who live there. But as an outsider, for me historically, it was your unity as Great Britain that saved Europe from its own divisions in its darkest days in the 1940s. If it hadn't stood together for quite a while until America intervened, Europe would not be, I think, what it is today. What I would wonder is, why not, now that the referenda are done, the Scottish referendum is now done, even the recent British election is done, you have great ideas for the environmental policy of the UK, great ideas for stronger relations with Europe post-Brexit. Why not make a bigger play in the national scene post-referenda? I feel that your ideas might help, integrate Scotland more into the UK. The last thing I want to say is the reason why I brought Margaret Thatcher. Britain always keeps losing its best people, and I'm obviously not bringing poll tax here, which was a terrible idea. Whenever the issue of Europe comes up, she resigned because of that. Also, the pound devalued in 1992 because of this, and I feel like right now the country is divided because of this issue again. When you guys are united, Europe is united too. So I hope you guys stay in the UK and have a great further ties with the EU.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me it was Margaret Thatcher's birthday today. All I can say is she wasn't my favourite UK politician, but she was undoubtedly a strong politician who made her mark. We may also have a slightly different interpretation of her departure from office, perhaps more being forced out than resigning on principle, but that's all history, so I won't go into that in detail. Look, 2 points I would make, and the first relates to how an independent Scotland would relate to the other countries of the United Kingdom as it is just now, and indeed the British Isles. The British Isles, of course, includes the Republic of Ireland. An independent Scotland is not, won't geographically float off anywhere into the North Sea. It's still going to be part of the British Isles. And so that cooperation with England, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, the Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, that will continue and be strong. I take part in the British-Irish Council right now. I sit around that table with 2 independent governments, the Republic and the United Kingdom government, and 3 devolved administrations, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland when it has an administration, Jersey, Guernsey, the Isle of Man. If Scotland was to become independent, we'd still sit round that British-Irish Council table. We'd just be there as an independent country, not as a devolved administration. So this idea that if Scotland becomes independent, we stop contributing to the future of the British Isles is one that I think my party has got to do more to counter. But the second point I would make is around Scotland's democratic position. Of course, we would always try to be part of the voice of the British Isles where we agreed and had a common purpose, using that greater voice to influence the rest of Europe or the rest of the world. But we have a situation just now where the United Kingdom is made up of 4 nations, England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. When Scotland did have an independence referendum 3 years ago, great play was made on the fact that we were an equal nation in this family of nations that was the United Kingdom. But when you find yourself, as we do right now, in a situation where our nation, as did Northern Ireland, voted to remain within the European Union, but we can't do anything about that and we're going to be taken out, it doesn't feel very much like an equal partnership. It feels like a partnership where we have to just do what we're told to do by the biggest partner in that partnership. And I don't think that is a strong foundation for that kind of partnership. I think the partnership between Scotland and the rest of the UK and British Isles would be stronger if we were participating as an independent country, because then it would be a genuine equal partnership with an equality of status and esteem and influence. And then, yes, we can combine our voice to do the kind of things you're talking about where that makes sense, whether that's influencing Europe or the rest of the world. So don't see it as Scotland walking away from that. See it as Scotland wanting to contribute to that, but on that basis of equality, which doesn't always feel to be the situation we're in right now.
Well, thank you very much for that, and also for being here again. I remember in our conversation last year, after you had experienced the assembly, you said to me, I hope it's okay if I quote it, that you were thrilled by discovering that there was a dynamic world north of Scotland. And
I'm thrilled to discover that there's a small country north of Scotland that can actually qualify for the Football World Cup, which Scotland can't seem to be able to do.
And I'm sure you cheered with us when we beat England last year.
No comment.
No, indeed, that's true. That's an inspiration of what small countries can do. But finally, while thanking you again, I think it is interesting, and you brought it to us last year, that if you look at Norway, Scotland, Faroe Islands, Iceland, Greenland, different countries creating a triangle in the North Atlantic, they were all decades ago dependent on oil and coal. But now all of them are between 60% or 100% renewable energy for all electricity production, whether it is hydro, wind, geothermal, or other areas. And Scotland's leadership in wind power is quite remarkable. And we're also seeing north of Scotland, between those countries, an extraordinary growth in tourism. In fact, the fastest growth in tourism we are seeing anywhere in the world today, where people from Asia, America, and elsewhere want to come and discover countries of clean energy, pure nature, and fascinated with the Arctic. So one of the things that you are contributing, irrespective of United Kingdom and the European Union, and I observed you use the phrase just in your closing remarks, you're not going to walk away, but you're clearly working towards a more engagement with the countries and the territories and the regions north of Scotland in terms of energy, shipping, economic activity, tourism, political dialogue by your presence here. And through that northern perspective, as we have seen here this morning, China, Japan, Korea, and other parts of the world. So if you could perhaps briefly summarize for us, how can you see Scotland in the next 10 years in enhancing this northern engagement of Scotland?
Well, firstly, I would agree with that. We increasingly look northwards as well as southwards in terms of looking to where we can make the biggest contribution. But I think the things we're talking about today will power, pardon the pun, power forward that relationship over the next 10 years and beyond, where we use our expertise and experience in areas like renewable energy, low carbon technology, and learn from what is being done here. Some of the developments we're talking about today, some of the implications of climate change for transportation and shipping, for example, just mean that we have to all think differently about this part of the world, and Scotland wants to be part of that, and will increasingly look here, in addition to the partnerships we have elsewhere as well.
Well, First Minister, Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.